But too often, poor leaders escalate, and sometimes they go straight from the very base of that triangle, launch straight to crisis. And at the crisis element, it's command and control. The ship's going down, the plane's going down, do this, do that. You've got to take command and control because it's a real important. But they skip over the important level of what is leadership. And leadership is very important. I mean, how do you resolve, the very complicated, nuggety, difficult areas? And that is leadership. And it's too easy to do this command and control response because I know what's happening. Well, that is disempowering those leaders that are already there. And you've got to engage in this leadership, which is actually listening, understanding what's going on. Too often in too many businesses, I find people jumping too many hoops to solve problems that aren't proper problems. They're symptoms of the problem. And you've got to boil the issues right back to its core. What is the actual problem we're trying to deal with here?
Welcome to the Success Consultancy's Just Great People podcast, the podcast that introduces you to ordinary people who've done extraordinary things. My name is Barry Eustance, and I'd like to introduce you to today's guest. Welcome to the Just Great People podcast. I'm joined today by Adrian Stratta, who's got a fascinating story to tell, from dropping out of perfectly serviceable airplanes as a parachute major, to driving Daphne up through, Daphne is a Land Rover, through Africa, 22,000 miles, to helping organizations lead and manage change. Adrian, over to you and your fascinating and inspiring story.
My inspiring story. As an aircraft captain, I'm sure you're horrified that people actually jump out of them.
I can't see a single good reason at this stage jump out of a serviceable airplane, but that's another issue.
Yeah, we never had first class travel, you see, so it's a bit rough down the back. So, but yeah, very great segue really. And what I do, I manage people and I manage process, and it's often through change and transformation. And how did you get there? Well, I was very lucky. I emulated that childhood schoolboy on my wall of a bedroom where there was a picture of a paratrooper stepping out of a helicopter in some desert scene. I thought, what's all that about? And I had no plan at all to join the army. And then at university, I was in the officer training corps, and it was a good way of subsidising my drinking, I think, and playing rugby and various other things, and enjoyable things rather than focusing on work. And I went down to the Parachute Regiment Depot, and I came out 17 years later. It was all a great fun and very enjoyable. Yeah, I learned a lot of things on the way. Two things really is how to manage people by listening, which you'll recognise straight away. And they funded an MBA at Cranfield, which is marvellous, and I had to argue to get that job, that appointment, but they shoved me straight into the Ministry of Defence to manage what was coming in, was called the new Defence Balanced Scorecard. Of course, you've done an MBA, you must know all about that. Well, I clearly hadn't got a clue, but you just work it out as you do on most of these things. So, how to measure performance. It was a very good resettlement job.
And you did some major logistic and project work, didn't you, as well, with some pretty significant zeros after the comma.
Commercially, you mean? So yeah, of course. I mean I wasn't quite sure. I had jobs lined up with Deloitte and PwC, but all they were going to do was shove me straight back into the Ministry of Defence, which I was escaping from really. So I didn't really fancy changing one uniform to another. So I did a bit of consultancy. A lot of it was about change and transformation. And for the last 20 years, really, I've been an interim manager. And the whole point about an interim manager is you're parachuted in, no pun, into a business that needs support at whatever level. I'm quite happy to be the T-boy. I'm quite happy to run the gig. And that's what I did on many occasions. You're brought in there with, authority from the board to sort of create the change, and you've got the levers of control, but you've also got the day-to-day operation to run. But that's many cases as a leader, and if we unpack what leadership is, you've actually got to create the right environment to turn around a business. And both in the financial downturn of 08, 09, and subsequently, I've been fortunate enough to go into a number of businesses, a lot that you'll recognise, aviation related, that actually you can understand and create change. Three big tenets really. Do we all buy into what is the vision? Because if you don't know where you're going, you haven't got a vision. Any road will take you there. So do you all understand, and is that attainable? So what are the attainable achievements of that vision goal, and then create the mission around it? And then you've got to enable the people to deliver that vision mission. And that to me is about listening to the workforce and the leaders, understanding what they're telling you, and then enabling the right leaders to go and enable and deliver that change, or create the outcomes you're looking for, and properly enable them.
Also, presumably creating leaders or empowering leaders, identifying leaders throughout the organization, not by dint of position, but by dint of their ability and their own leadership potential that can be unlocked in a good change, in a good...
No, entirely. I mean, it's about outcomes, isn't it? I mean, it's not about how fast you run or how high you can climb or how quick you can do X, Y, and Z. It's what's the outcome. And it really is about empowering people. I don't know about yourself. I'm sure it's the same. If someone's looking over your shoulder telling you how to do something, the long screwdriver, it's very disempowering. Whereas actually, if you properly empower somebody, they've got to get on with it. But then you've also got to measure it as well, to measure the outcomes, not how it's done. So if you're measuring that outcome, if you can't measure, you can't manage. But you've got that very important balance between measurement and what is performance versus the long screwdriver and stopping people. That's not enablement. But you've got to create that safe to fail environment, because if they're then enabled, they've got to be strong enough or confident enough or have the ability to come back and say, I've got a problem, this isn't working, that's not, and then you can help them and overcome that hurdle and then release them and become even more enabled. And the more you drive that as low as possible, the more they've got skin in the game to make it happen. So empowerment is massive for me. I like to be empowered, and I can't understand why others don't want to be empowered to deliver.
But there is a bit of a broad culture of disempowerment in many organizations that we see, where the people at the front counter dealing and the front line dealing with the customers and the stakeholders actually don't feel empowered. They feel disempowered. They feel that nothing's actually feeding back up the line. The lines of communication are too long or too complex or too full of friction. Is that your experience? And how do you relate that to leadership? And we've discussed leadership. Adrian and I have discussed leadership previously. Can we unpack the importance of leadership here?
Now, I think everything you said is the very real problem, the art of leadership. I mean, the art, it is an art. There is so much theory around leadership, and what it is, what it should be, what it has to be. I think as an interim, I've been in many organizations, so I would come back to say, so many people say leadership can only work in this organization, that organization. I'm going to beg to differ. I think the proper leadership and the tenets of good leadership are always going to remain extant in any organization. It was Peters who had the 5 levels of leadership, and the fourth one was thumping the chest and I'm the great manager, but you take out the manager and they all fall apart. It's the next level up, that 5th level of leadership, where actually you are enabling people, and that is about enabling. But you can only enable people if you know there's the capability there, and you only know that by listening. You've got 2 ears, you've got to listen twice as hard. But when you speak, it's got to be an inclusive kind of speaking, and you've got to understand clearly. I mean, turning around businesses, some people say, oh, it's not the way it's done around here, and done some really hard change. Working in the baggage hall of Heathrow was quite unionised, shall we say? That's always an interesting. But actually, then let you empower them to take control of their lives. Hang on a minute. Going back to the army, a very set way of doing things. I was able to create quite a bit of change in the army of how they did things, bringing in new technology, new ideas. It's not disabling what they were doing before. It's actually getting them to think differently. And it's not the way it's done around here, sir. Yeah, they put the sir in, but they mean it. Well, actually, by the end of it, they were the bigger advocates of change.
I mean, it depends how they say sir, of course.
You would know. You fly in that direction.
There's a big difference in tonality between sir.
Of course. But that, and then there's a fourth tenet in how to do change. You got to enjoy it. You got to create a bit of fun too. And you spend so much time at work because you got to enjoy what you're doing, and that's in it. Very important. And drive that sort of sense of culture. When we were doing the big change, trying to get their IPO a couple of years ago, my program was to prepare the business for this IPO through operational change, how to drive out 25 million of an already stretched budget that was coming out of COVID. Some of it was in COVID, and that was pan-European. And what appeals to the leadership requirements of, say, Italy or Spain or out of Croatia, is that the same to the Dutch and in the UK? The story and the message is the same. It's how you deliver that message that might be through by different people. Never disempower people, always empower people. This is the general outcomes we are trying to achieve. What was doing the rounds at the time, which I thought was extremely great, was that TED talk that has became viral of some chap dancing on a hill at a open air concert. I think it must have been America somewhere, and he was sort of the drunken guy in the corner on his own. Well, he was the first mover, but the biggest step of change is that people gradually tried to join him, and as it's the second step, second or third movers that join him that create the movement of change. And then the whole hill was then dancing, and they all got on board with change, and that was used in the TED talk. And we kind of used that as how to create the ambience and get people engaged in the movement. So it was talking, and it's creating the forums and the speech and the communication of ideas and making sure people are heard, that they're engaged in that process. It's really important.
I mean, the buy-in is absolutely crucial, isn't it, to the success of any change program? And it's often under-communicated. The why are we doing it rather than what are we doing? It's so important to people. Engaging their emotions, getting people's buy-in at the emotional level is often massively undervalued, underrated, and underdeveloped in organizations.
And when buy-in is absolutely critical, and that's why you've got to listen, and that's why you've got to engage people. Adaptive leadership is something that we've spoken about before, and there's a couple of theories out there. The one that I absolutely love was by Keith Grint of Warwick University. And if you just imagine a triangle, and the tip of that triangle is crisis, and at the base of that triangle is tame problems, and in the middle is these difficult, nuggety, awkward things which are called wicked problems. So most problems today in business are tame problems, and they need to be managed and resolved in a way with project management or discussion or basic business issues. But too often poor leaders escalate, and sometimes they go straight from the very base of that triangle, which needs proper accountancy processes or normal business management tools, launch straight to crisis. And at the crisis element, it's command and control. The ship's going down, the plane's going down, do this, do that. You got to take command and control because it's a real important. But they skip over the important level of what is leadership, and leadership is very important. I mean, how do you resolve, the very complicated, nuggety, difficult areas? And that is leadership. And it's too easy to do this command and control response because I know what's happening. Well, that is disempowering those leaders that are already there. And you've got to engage in this leadership, which is actually listening, understanding what's going on. Too often in too many businesses, I find people jumping too many hoops to solve problems that aren't proper problems. They're symptoms of the problem. And you've got to boil the issues right back to its core. What is the actual problem we're trying to deal with here?
And that must, when you come in as an interim leader in organizations, that must put you in a very strong position from an objective point of view. Presumably you come in with a new perspective and a new objectivity that perhaps may be missing, and organizations are sitting there with corporate myopia.
100%. I mean, you're not, well, first of all, you're not adhering to the politics of the organization. You're not there to sort of climb up the greasy pole and make a name for yourself. So you can be, as your word, utterly objective about what's going on. And actually, I love to ask the daft questions that no one's prepared to ask because they're not necessary. I won't say I'm not accountable. Of course I'm accountable. But you can ask the silly questions and challenge the obvious and say, why are we doing this? Why have we tried this? Well, did we really try it? And it's sometimes the solutions are so often in front of people and organisations. This is the crazy thing. I mean, we all laugh when people say that, but so often they are there. And just a question of unpacking them and understanding why they did or didn't fail. And people are people, right? I say I manage people, I manage process. I don't manage much process. You manage the people who manage that process to put them into the right framework to go and do their expertise. And so it is always often about people. So I love all this digital transformation because it's which widget is worst best, but actually you've still got to get the people on board with that journey. It goes back to that dancing man, who's the second and third mover on that journey. So as the interim, you're very often a proper interim. You're there to remove yourself in 3, 6, 9 months time. And I do remember the turnaround. It was a logistics support company at Heathrow and Birmingham in the US. And they were just, it was in the 08, 09 financial crash where there was falling numbers of travellers and therefore, people couldn't make money. Well, we turned a business from a loss to a profit and then sold it on as a big joint venture, purely because we could take objective views. I was able to take objective views of what was going on in that business and right-size that business to make sure it was working. They had full employment, and yet they're bringing temporary staff. Well, why would you do that? You're just so overstaffed. They weren't controlling their product. So the product was going out and, better put some more product onto plane X, Y, and Z to keep them happy. Well, that's your profit going out the door there, So it was back to taking that step back. A lot of coaching is all about looking in the mirror. Well, look at the business in the mirror and what is happening.
Why do you think, Adrian, organisations lose that objective focus? They set out, they're entrepreneurial, it's all going great, they build a hierarchy to deal with all the routines. And then what happens? How do they suddenly veer off and spear into the wall?
Scale is this was a classic case. I mean, scaling up a business is absolutely not as obvious, is not as easy, and not everyone at every level is bought into the same level of outcome, or they're doing the same thing day in, day out. Sometimes it can get a bit challenging. How do you keep motivated? So that comes back to leadership and providing the right carrot to the organization. You think of some of the retail companies. John Lewis Partnership is a classic. It's got all the co-op society where they engage all their employees into the outcome of that business. It's struggling at the moment. I get all that. But the more you can engage the employees and they are fairly remunerated or they get time. I mean, people come to work because they trade their time for money ultimately, and they want enjoyment. So how can you make it a fair exchange of time and labor for money and enjoyment? And they don't want to be sort of downtrodden. They want to engage in that business. And the more you can get a leadership challenge to the lowest levels where they've actually got some kind of skin in the game to make it work, and then they're empowered, they've got some performance related target they would like to get at. So if you can engage more and more people, it's not always about the chain of command with the big hammer coming and do X, Y, and Z. Actually, the more you can get people to willingly do something, that's absolutely fantastic. And that was entirely the case where they're engaged in finding the solutions to the problems. It takes more time, of course, but the sustainable change that you get out of it has far greater longevity.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think if you've invested in a change program and it doesn't work, that's a very time-consuming and very expensive operation. Whereas if you're getting people engaged and actually contributing to the change program throughout the organization, I keep talking about the diagonal slash through the organization of leadership, a diagonal slash of opinion and views and contribution, and it's done voluntarily. A, it's fun because people enjoy doing it, they're seeing a result, but B, you're getting this wonderful multiplier effect where you're getting not just a few good ideas from a select group of people, but organizational wide input, even in the worst case where you're having something like a closure. And I've been involved with redundancy programs. If you're involving people in the decision that's particularly going to affect them and the broader organization, you can get a huge amount of value from that by actually engaging the people at the very, very front end of the organization who are going to feel the impact and who can actually buy into it, even if it's bad news.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I totally buy into that. I think also people sort of, certainly at bigger companies, they're a bit too removed sometimes from their business. Not that they don't know what's going on. It's they set their board standards and they have their board agreements and that's what they want to do. But they haven't always worked through the realities of some of those things and what it actually takes and what they've got to do. And because the board is constantly hearing the information, they've started the process so much earlier than the business has. So there's always that time lag of cause and effect. So smaller businesses, you can definitely have change, cause change, and you're engaged more in it because it's more live. But so often that a change program is dealt with independently as an independent item, and it's not core business. Well, actually, it is core business. It has to be core business. And the last gig I was on was where it was completely revising the total operating model, and all the sort of line managers and directors were all very, very, very engaged, and they wanted this solution. And it went to the board who, well, that's not what we want. Well, you've asked for this change. So there was a complete disconnect about, which is why you've got to all agree on what the outcome is right at the start. So unless you've got a clear vision and an outcome, whatever change you're trying to create, if there's not agreement, which is very hard, by the way, it's very hard to get that, you're not going to be successful. And secondly, it is core business. And to say it's not, or it's a problem of HR, or it's a problem of IT or whatever. Well, even if it is IT, everyone's got to work with it.
It's always a problem of leadership, isn't it? Essentially, it falls right in the lap. And I keep saying this, that the domain of leadership is change and the future. And without an executive sponsor who's actually really engaged with the program and qualified, exactly, it's going to drive itself into the wall. And the example you just given is exactly that case where what's the point in doing this unless the entire organization from the leadership team down and up buy into it? What's going to happen the next change when people get involved and start committing time, emotion, energy and voluntary contribution, only to find it stymied when it gets to the board? How can that happen?
And exactly 100%. And in the case, it was quickly resolved and sorted. But actually, it's a powerful example. And it does come back to the fact that something we were talking about earlier is that people are always very different. And we talked about the game changer index and how a useful way that was of assessing your human capabilities within and how people react and their predisposed ability to think in one direction might take them down a path that at a board you think, well, how do we end up with that decision-making outcome, whereas actually we've all agreed? And how many times have you been into businesses where there's this massive groupthink? This is the way it's got to be because we've all decided. And how do you break out of that groupthink? And I think that's one of the real areas where, as an interim, if you're being honest, in order to achieve that aim and outcome, do you really need to do X, Y, and Z? Is that the right way of behaving and operating? And it takes quite a strong leader to say, yeah, you're probably right. That was not right or incorrect. We need to course correct rather than drive on a failing solution. Because every board, doesn't matter how high you are on a board, there's always pressures above you, which is so often ignored as well.
We both feel passionately about the importance of leadership and how that not only affects the future of the organization, but also the present culturally in terms of why people come to work, how much time they commit to the organization voluntarily, and how the organization performs generally. Can we get back to that conversation at our next podcast? Because leadership is absolutely central. If we look around globally, we'll see there are failings of leadership left, right, and center, and the effects of that at the individual level are immense and potentially terrifying. And then we can bring this to the corporate and organization level, where the same principles apply. Is that a conversation we can have in a future podcast?
Yeah, perfect. I mean, absolutely. I mean, leadership is a topic that will run and run and run because it drives. I mean, I love all the sporting analogies for leadership as well. You're the conductor of the orchestra, you're the team coach. All these things really do apply. And actually, it is more about people rather than action at that level where you've been there, you've got your badges, and you know what you're doing. But actually, it's about engaging the people in that and how do you do it and what are the best ways of doing it. That'll be a really exciting thing to deliver.
If you'd like to know more about the Success Consultancy's People Change Leadership and Management Framework, please simply click on the QR code or in the link in the show notes below. And please do remember to like and subscribe the Just Great People podcast. Thank you. So that's it for today's Just Great People podcast from the Success Consultancy. We hope and trust you've enjoyed it. Please join us next time, and please do remember to subscribe. Thanks for joining us.